Now, these days, you do hear the word de-dollarization, don't you? And it's been doing the rounds again in the wake of the BRICS summit of emerging economies taking place in Russia. China and Russia, as well as India, say they are determined to find alternative ways to supplant or supplement the dollar as a means of moving money around the world. Even Zambia, which has been a close ally of the West and a big receiver of Western aid, also wants to de-dollarize as soon as possible. And now there are growing calls here in Nigeria as the country joins the BRICS power bloc as a partner nation for Abuja to also join the move to reduce reliance on the US dollar. So what's the issue with the dollar here, and what are the BRICS countries hoping to achieve with this attempt to de-dollarize international trade? And what could it all mean for the Nigerian economy? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Lagos by Professor Bongo Adi, a leading business analyst and professor of economics at the Lagos Business School. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, just tell us in layperson's terms what de-dollarization is.
Thank you very much, Charles, for having me this evening. Well, you've already said what de-dollarization is all about, which is that some countries want to do away with the use of the dollar as a medium of international exchange. You will recall that the dollar is a currency that has full convertibility in the sense that you can move it around. So you can move from Naira to the dollar before you can get to any other currency. It's not possible to convert our Naira to even Ghanaian cedis without passing through the dollar. So it is the fully convertible international currency that is in use for all financial transactions and international trade. So what the countries are saying, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa and other countries that are joining them, is that they want to stop that and perhaps find an alternative, a parallel system that will maybe begin to compete with the dollar. Well, that is more of a wish, but because when we look at this, it's important for us to also understand why the ascendancy of the dollar or the supremacy of the dollar. So when we understand that, perhaps we can put in proper perspective and context, the prospects of the current move to really de-dollarize these economies.
Well, I'm going to come to that, all of that, and thank you for setting that out as clearly as you have. But before we come to understand all the issues behind it, what is the current policy on de-dollarization in Nigeria? Is there any policy on that?
Well, I don't know if there is any policy. Again, I think it's something that government is still considering. And then given where we are currently, I think any option will be considered by the present government because we are challenged on many fronts. Not least, when the supply of dollar has really depreciated or diminished and then has really set our currency in rapid depreciation that we've witnessed over the past year and a half. So I think it's something that the government may have to look into. But then again, so whether it is successful still remains to be seen because we have to look at, I don't think there is any successful antecedent to it up to this moment. So it's a new wave, which I think it's possible given the state of industrial production around the world. For instance, if we consider that Chinese output, which is around 11.4 trillion currently, compared to that of the combined of the United States, Germany, Britain, India, even France. So if you put all of them together, so that comes to about 11 trillion, meaning that China has more of 4 billion dollars worth of output than the rest of the world. So that's huge. I think that is what's giving the Chinese that sort of impetus to begin to think of maybe it is possible to supplant the dollar. So it's something I believe that Nigeria may want to consider, but I don't think, I'm not aware of any government policy to that effect at this moment.
Well, I'm going to come to examples of where people have been forced to de-dollarize and what the consequences are, and to get your take on that. But just staying with Nigeria for the moment, I mean, theoretically speaking, because I mean you are an economist, and therefore you fiddle with numbers and sort of theories and so on, economic sort of, you know, theories. Is it likely, would de-dollarization likely strengthen the Naira and boost trade with countries that don't depend on the US dollar? I mean, would it be a positive move for Nigeria to de-dollarize?
Well, I don't know if our problem is that of the currency. So we have to look at our export profile, you know, our product space, to know what it is that we are trading with the rest of the world. It is only when, as I don't know if it's a problem of currency. That is not the reason why we are not exporting as much as we should. Our potential, export potential, has not been optimized. So if you look at Nigeria's product space, it is clearly dominated by crude oil exports, or you know, products related to the oil and gas industry. So that is almost 85% of what we export. So the remaining 15% will be combination of other things in, you know, unprocessed raw materials, agricultural products, and all of that, and then solid minerals. So given that, without diversification of our export profile, it would be difficult to sustain the argument that our challenge in boosting our exports is that of the currency in which we trade with the rest of the world. So I don't think that is much of a challenge to us. The biggest challenge that we have in the economy is to diversify our export profile, you know, make it less dependent on oil, increase non-oil exports. So if we can do that, then that is when de-dollarization will begin to make sense, okay? So what is the volume that we trade, for instance, with China? How much do we export? We import more from China than we export to China. China is only buying, you know, from us our wood, you know, solid minerals, and of course crude oil. So that is the more that China is taking from us. So I can't think of much processed raw materials that we are sending to China. So again, the same thing applies to India and all the countries that are within this BRICS de-dollarization network. So I wouldn't say, it's difficult from where we are to see how that will actually boost. Of course, if we increase or diversify our export you know, products, then it will make sense. Of course, it will enhance you know, the easy availability of currencies, and then reduce the pressure on this single dollar window. So we have multiple windows that we can, multiple corridors that we can play with. So that will, of course, you know, lessen the pressure, which will definitely have some impact on the value. So it will, yes, that will work, but that is only if our export profile is robust and versatile.
Yeah, that's very interesting and very educational. Essentially, you're saying that Nigeria can't pin its hopes on an economic revival with de-dollarization alone. But you make a number of interesting points there, because, I mean, in a world where trade with other BRICS countries will not constitute all of Nigeria's trade, or even a majority of its trade, de-dollarization raises a question about whether it can stabilize and improve the economy. And I'm wondering, in such a situation, just given your expertise, in such a situation where we might end up having a two-tier economy, with one depending on other currencies and you know, and the other on the dollar, I mean, how might that work? Will that sort of make the economy a little bit schizophrenic?
Not necessarily. So, because if you look at it, like I said earlier, if we have alternative to the dollar, so it means that people, okay, rather than seeking for dollars, someone can find maybe a brick, I don't know what name it will be called. So there will be an alternative, there will be an option. So if people can use such options, so like I said, the pressure on the dollar will reduce, so that people who are looking for dollar for import, because essentially it's just dollar for imports. Okay, so but if it's for export, everybody wants to get dollar, because I believe that dollar will still be strong. So but so long as it's so far as it's for imports, yes, the more we have of alternatives, I think the better for the economy. Yeah, but should we actually be depending on an import-driven economy? Of definitely, if we're even going to be export dependent, we need to import a whole lot. So yes, the more diversity we have with respect to the currency of international transactions, the better for us. But I think our emphasis will be to expand our exports, such that we can attract whichever currency, whether it is dollar or whatever. So we've been here before, remember during the Cold War days, we had the East against the West led by the United States, and the Oriental, the East, led by the former Soviet Union. So Nigeria was a member of the non-aligned movement of 77 countries or thereabout. So what they did then was to play one bloc against the other, to gain, different advantages. So I think it will actually be something good that we can play one block against the other to gain such advantages. And I think that's what, in a multipolar world system or bipolar world system, I think non-aligned countries like Nigeria stand to benefit, not just to, pitch all their eggs in one basket. So it's better to really, remain neutral. So not saying that we're going to go to BRICS or we're going to go to dollars. So stay at the center. So whichever one works in their interest, they can go in that direction. So for me, that would be a more functional and feasible strategy.
And it is your assessment that de-dollarization would work, certainly from an import perspective, would work for the average Nigerian businessman or woman who imports goods into Nigeria?
Yes, I don't need to say much to that. Yes, it's for imports alone. Okay, but for other things, well, we can also be thinking about importing capital. So if you are thinking of that, so it means that that gives us some, for instance, if you are looking for project finance for big projects, so we can hope to get maybe better rates playing one system against the other. So it's possible to get such kind of lower interest rates, maybe that's possible. So again, that remains to be seen. So all these are hypothetical conjectures. So we haven't seen whether this is going to be possible. Because like I said, it is important to put this in historical context. How come the dollar became the dominant, hegemon that it has been over the period since the end of the Second World War? So remember that before then, it was the Great British pound sterling that was the universal currency. So before 1945, at the end of the Second World War, British economy was decimated, and then we witnessed the rise of the new hegemon, which is the United States. And since then, we've been in the Pax Americana. And I think that why we have the dollar supremacy today is because of the what some political economists will refer to as the regime of accumulation that we have. So the modern economy is one that is actually driven by the petrodollar. Given that oil exploration started in the United States, and then they started to make a whole lot of money. So their output increased and all of that. The financial market expanded beyond that of other countries. And then with their role in the Second World War also, they became very dominant. So has that regime of accumulation changed in fundamental ways that will maybe trigger a new mode of regulation that we now can really argue that we'll have a truly sustainable multipolar or bipolar world? Well, I think the facts are still out there. So, but I think it's interesting days. So we continue to look at the facts and see what we make out of them.
Well, that's a very interesting analysis you've given there, and I'm sure you know this, but of course the dollar became even more ascendant in the 1970s. I think it was Nixon or somebody who kind of
exactly.
moved it away from the
Nixon,
gold standard.
He put it off from the gold.
Yeah, gold standard, and it subsequently became even more ascendant with the way the Americans backed it up. But you made a point earlier, Prof, where you were talking about that we haven't really tested de-dollarization and seen it, how it might work. I mean, obviously not in Nigeria, but a country like Russia, for example, which has been riddled with US sanctions, has proven, has it not, that a country can survive and even thrive in a de-dollarized world. I mean, the US froze over $300 billion of Russian, dollarized assets in Western banks. And the Russians have had to find a way to survive. And that is why we're hearing from people like now Moscow, Beijing, countries like Iran, North Korea, and of course, India. They argue that de-dollarization has, as a result of what we saw in Russia, for example, and also Iran, de-dollarization has become irreversible in a rather perverse sort of way.
Well, yeah, so I like that point you raised about Russia. So I think that was rather than Russia's own determination to do that. I think they were kind of compelled to do that because of the sanctions that the United States and some other countries imposed on it as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. The conflict with the West, so to speak. Yeah, so they were forced to now look for an alternative. Of course, as I say, necessity is the mother of invention. So they're now trying to look at opportunity. But again, we have to understand the position of Russia. Russia controls the largest gas reserve in the world, all right? So they were building the gas. They control the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, and then they started building the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, to take gas from a Russian city to Greifswald in Germany. Okay, and then Russia also controls the largest pipeline network crisscrossing through Ukraine that supplies gas to the whole of Europe. So as a country so richly endowed with natural resources, not least gas, which is in huge demand in Europe. I overheard Macron, the president of France, the other day, lamenting that they are solely dependent on Russia for their natural gas. So Europe is dependent on Russian gas. So if Russia wields such enormous economic influence in Europe, so it's possible for Russia to actually de-dollarize. Okay, as we've seen, they've asking the other countries, all countries that buy from it, to pay in rubles. So we've seen that happen. So Russia could achieve that because, again, they have that domino control of natural gas, which is in huge demand in Europe. So this is like a monopolist. So a monopolist is someone that supplies a commodity that is in huge demand, the only supplier of a commodity that is in huge demand. So that's what Russia is to relative to the rest of Europe, and they've really extracted a huge pound of flesh from that. So that could work for Russia. It could also work for China. Why? Because currently, as I said, China is the industrial, is a factory of the global, of the world. I just mentioned that they control the value of their industrial output is about $11.4 trillion compared to that of the rest of the world, which is lower. But then that is not what really directs the world finance. So I remember there is this statement by Neil Ferguson in one of his book, The Ascent of Money. He said that the planet finance dominates the planet of the Earth. So if you notice, the stock market is at least 10% more than the GDP of the world. Now, the bond market itself is about 50% more. Now, if you go to derivatives is like 10 times more. And then, so if you go, so when you go to the planet of finance, you notice that it is actually dominant in the United States. The Chinese money is all in the United States. So that is why I think, yes, it's good to talk, because of what Russia has successfully done, other countries may begin to harbor the ambition that they may do the same. But again, it remains to be seen. But if there is anything that both America and the BRICS countries, including Nigeria, will worry about, it is the ascent of technology.
Right.
Cryptocurrency, for instance,
I was just going to mention, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Credible threats.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to mention cryptocurrency because we're almost out of time. So if you give me a very pithy sort of answer, but, cryptocurrency is also being used to bypass the dollar system, isn't it? I mean, you can use Bitcoin to send
so not only the dollar
anywhere in the world without the dollarized banking system.
So that's what I'm saying, that the banking system, the central banking is under attack by crypto. And it's a matter of time. So maybe the central banks will try to catch up with crypto, but I don't know how that is going to be. So what I think the global financial system needs to worry about will be the attack that will come from fintechs and from crypto. I remember the central bank governor recently, was quoted to have said that, fintechs making monetary policy management difficult in West Africa. I think that is something that the entire world needs to focus on rather than, the dollarization and all of that.
Talking about attack, the U.S. is threatening to punish countries that de-dollarize. I mean, the U.S. Senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, is introducing a bill in the U.S. Congress to ban countries from, ban countries that basically from the global dollar system if they attempt to de-dollarize. I mean, the bill would, for instance, sanction countries and financial institutions using China's or Russia's payment system as an alternative to dollar sort of centered one. So there are geopolitical implications. I think you touched on that earlier, especially if the Republicans and Donald Trump capture the White House in the upcoming U.S. election. I mean, and I suppose Nigeria really doesn't want to get caught up in all that, does it, as a non-aligned country?
As I said, I think the best strategy for Nigeria to play in this game is to be neutral, to be non-aligned, so that they can play one block against the other. But would the United States sanctions work against these countries? Okay, let's see how the sanctions will work. You see, the dollar became dominant when America controlled global outputs in all ramifications. In all
a minute and a half. So we've got a minute and a half, so do keep it brief. Sorry about that. Go on.
Sure. So America was the only country standing. But today, you have enormous production capacity in China, that China actually enjoys trade surpluses with so many countries in the world. So China can actually de-dollarize if they want, and there's nothing the United States can really do about it. The same thing with Russia. I've just spoken about Russia's enormous capacity in natural gas and oil resources. So Russia can decide, and they have done that, to sell their products in their own currency. And the IMF released a report recently that the Russian economy has remained resilient and actually grown, the fourth largest economy or so in Europe or in the world, despite the sanctions. So that tells us that maybe the sanctions have had limited impact on Russia's economy. So, well, they used to say that Russian threats are no threats, but maybe we can say that American threat may be no threats to these countries.
I like that. On that note, I want to thank you exceedingly. We're all the wiser for your analysis, which is, of course, why he's a leading business analyst and professor of economics at the Lagos Business School. Professor Bongo Adi on the line from Lagos. Thank you ever so much. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja, Lagos and Port Harcourt. Bye-bye and thank you for watching.